To be honest, I'm not a big fan of panel discussions, but I'm a really big fan of dialogues. And I have a, or how can we change, or how can we turn this panel discussion into a little bit more like a dialogue? That's the one thing I want you to remember. Dialogue is all about listening, not about talking, but listening. So I hope you listen each other's and try to build on each other's comments. Continue. You just said, I was thinking, I want to add this, and you can talk as much as you want if you listen each other's also. And let's start with the warm-up question. Now I want you all to talk about your experiences, and the question is, what was the last EdTech service or innovation that really made an impression on you, and why? Who wants to start?
I have a very silly thing. What I do every day, I study French with an application, 8 words every day, and it takes like 3 minutes. And it's really funny when it starts changing, because I also repeat the words, try to produce the language. It's like 3 minutes per day, and it's so ridiculous how simple it is, but it has activated the part of my brain that is kind of constructing sentences in French. And I studied it at school. It was like 20, 30 years ago when I was some ancient history.
Okay.
Olli.
Well, I do investigate learning applications as my job, so I've faced quite a lot of applications. The last one that we evaluated was from Brazil, called Play Kids. They have tons of material, different kind of cartoon animations, games, whatever. And they also have a book club, and those are sort of connected with each other. And I really appreciated their approach, that they combine this digital approach into physical books, real stories.
So the one that springs to mind is a small company that we've just given some grant funding to, called Teacher Tap in the UK. It's run by a journalist who's interested in education, and also by an academic. And what they do is it's an app that goes to teachers, and you get asked 3 questions every day, multiple choice, a little bit of an answer. And on day 4, I think it is, they give you then the results from what everyone else has said. So there's things. So in the UK, we get graded by an organisation called Ofsted. You get outstanding to needs improvement. So simple things like, if you work in an outstanding school, you're more likely to go to the pub. If when asked, did your technology break today, 50% of teachers on that day said something didn't work with their technology. So it's really simple little kind of questions, but it's a little bit like getting a kind of touch paper on what's actually happening in our schools, so you can ask those questions every day.
I think one of the nicest ideas that I've come recently is an app that is trying to get kids excited about reading in the classroom, and they do this by connecting them with authors who start to write a story, and then the children get to vote on what should happen next. And the author has a couple of days to write the next bit of the story, and children also write alongside this, so they're really involved in the creation process.
Yeah, I think the last thing that I saw something related to EdTech was when I was looking at my son, who was playing a guitar. And I think things have really improved from my days, because he was really learning much faster than I did. And I think that must be the technology.
Everyone up? Mr. DJ? Oh, yeah. And as you have told us, and kind of like the theme that we're working today on is that we should be utilizing more digital technologies and tools. But still, one might say that it has been a bit slow start. Do you agree with this? And what do you think that is the main reason for the slow start in utilizing digital technologies in education?
You made me really laugh, because in 1980s, when I was studying in Canada, they said that soon we are going to have paperless offices. And I would call that a very slow start because it still hasn't happened.
Yeah, I think the development has been slow, but I think it's just a good thing. We're not in a hurry, and hurrying at this point would be the worst thing to do. Of course, we need to have the mindset and the will to develop and not resist something that is new. Of course, doing things with the old way is always a little bit easier on the exact same moment, but then again, if you adopt something new, already next day might be a little bit easier for you.
Yeah, and I think that this is quite standard in technological development, that expectations at the short run are always exaggerated very much. And in the long run, you don't really understand how much things will change. Like, I mean, the paperless office is a good example. I think we still have some paper, at least on my desk. But I think things have also changed really a lot if you compare it to 20 years ago. So we just have wrong ideas about the future quite often.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree. Just it always takes a long time to change systems in any way, technology or not. And initial attempts to change how technology was used in schools was very top down, and just saying if we put technology in the classroom, people will change what they do. And I think there's been a real learning over time that this isn't about just putting technology in schools, it's a whole behaviour change process. And we know that for anything that takes a long time.
Back up what Lisa just said there.
But if we ask from the teachers, maybe Kirsti can answer this. Do they see or do they expect the change be more faster? Do they want to have the change for digital tools and implementing digital tools happens faster than it happens now? Do they want to see?
Well, it depends. We have youngest of my students were born 1997, so they are true kind of digital native generation themselves. With more mature teachers, they have these bad experiences of the old time things, like in the 1990s when you needed to use text processing, for instance. Everything was very tedious, and they had lots of machines at school, and there was network and everything, but there were no applications or nothing sensible to do with them. So I guess they still remember those difficult times, and I think the only thing is that we need to learn from the young people. Everything that I know about Twitter or anything that I use more advanced kind of social media or new kinds of things, I usually learn from my daughters. So we need to improve this kind of transgenerational learning, but the idea that teacher is the one who should teach and should know everything, that burns them out if they need to know everything and they cannot learn from the young people. So it's regardless of age, it has to do with the approach to learning and teaching.
And I think for teachers' main job is that they want their kids to learn. They want their kids to kind of progress within that year. So if tech, for whatever reason, is not contributing to that, they will not use it. Or if something takes too much time, they will not use it. So I think sometimes in terms of it being, maybe it being slow, is the fact that it's not benefiting teachers as much as they've wanted it to be. But I think progress learning, save teachers time, then you'll get your customers.
You recently wrote a blog post about evidence in EdTech, and you mentioned something about changing attitudes. Can you elaborate that a bit? That whose attitudes are we talking about, and what kind of attitudes or expectations? I recall that you were talking about something.
So I think what we're seeing is a change in attitudes in EdTech companies that we come across. So a few years ago, so there's this, the big trade show in the UK, BET, lots of educational technologies there. I went there 3 years ago, and you asked people, oh, what evidence is there behind your product? And people barely understood the question and just wanted to show me again, like, but look, it's a robot. 3 years on, I go around the stalls asking the same question, and I don't go up to robot stalls so much anymore, which might be part of it. But people really are talking to me about the pedagogy behind their ideas. They're really they're drawing on research, and they've spoken to teachers. So I think there is a real change in attitudes. And to pick up on what Amy just said, I think there's maybe an increase in humility. I think we as a community who are interested in EdTech have to realise that we are the only people who conceptualise this problem in terms of EdTech. How do we get people to use more technology and so on? For the teacher, the problem is, how do I improve behaviour? How do I get better maths results? And I think there's a better sense of, I think there's more understanding of that from EdTech companies. How do we fit in with what teachers want?
We did have one study on this, and in some schools in Espoo, and actually the result was so that if the aim is collaborative knowledge creation, if it's not transmitting knowledge or so, it was almost impossible to do it without technology. So usually kind of high-tech knowledge practices were related with high-level thinking kind of, or the goals. So there is some kind of thing that we can do with technology that we cannot do without it. It's actually, for instance, I have a class like this size. How are you going to be interactive in the class of 400 people? It's impossible to do without technology. I've done it for years, but still, in order to get the silent guy in the back seat to be active participator, may be difficult.
Just picking up on that point,
Yeah.
I think one of the really interesting things so one of the things I often say is if you do the same practice and you just put technology on top of it, you're just making that practice more expensive.
Yeah.
The real trick is when you can put technology in that changes practice, and therefore you're getting better or different results. So that's always a kind of, picking up on that. It's like, what does that enable us to do that we couldn't do beforehand? And that's difficult. They're difficult things to look at, but yeah, that's the trick.
Let's talk a little bit more about the things that we can do with the technology. If we look at the current innovations we have and compare it with the demand, what kind of innovations, tech innovations in education sector we need, are we missing some tools from the market? Should the companies focus on some areas or some products that not exist yet?
Yeah,
Olli.
I definitely think so. And the Harvard University, no, it's from Stanford. Stanford University math teacher, whose name I cannot recall now, but he claimed, I saw his speech at the Minerva Tori maybe 2 years ago, and he claimed that iPads, when they arrive to classroom, he's expecting the same kind of revolution with mathematics learning than what happened when people invented numbers. Because of all the dimensions and virtual manipulatives and everything like that, he, as a mathematician, said that should change completely how we see math nowadays. Well, maybe nowadays, not nowadays, but after a couple of years or tens of years. So my answer is yes.
So one area where we would love to make more investments and we just haven't found any opportunities is preschool and early childhood. It's shown to be one of the most important times in a child's development. How can we use technology to support inclusive development for that age group?
Yeah, and on the other end, I think one of the things that has been impacting on this behavior is that many university campuses, our university campus development is now asking much more about how you create kind of a community, learning communities, than about teaching things and these processes, because all the knowledge is already available, and it's much more about creating community and creating kind of a social aspects at the university level as well.
Yeah, one also that is really lacking is a really smooth kind of learning platform. We've been working with very good ones, but if you think about how many passwords do people have, logging in different kinds of systems, so more than an individual application, we would need that kind of system that you kind of need one password and then everything is integrated, everything is smooth, everything goes like that, and people don't have to think about technology. They can focus on looking at their learning and the content and the skills. But very often you're constantly struggling with all kinds of keywords and passwords and I mean passwords I was talking about. So that is really at its infancy, I would say. And in the future, I've seen very interesting, we are going towards paper-full offices because the latest innovation is to use paper as the surface for digital technology. There is a new innovation, and very soon I can do something like this, like in my hand. So it should be much more seamless. The problem is that everybody's working on their own little innovation, and I think projects like this, Growing Mind or this kind of big project, they should provide seamless solutions that would make our lives easier. Because otherwise people start hating technology. They always need to log on somewhere and do this and that, and everything is so difficult.
Yeah, I think usability is what people are struggling quite a lot nowadays in classrooms. It's a completely different use case when you have 25 kids trying to log into a music-making application. The same application might work just fine at home with one child. Yeah. But when teacher tries to monitor and control everything and sharing the passwords and all, can be a really messy thing, and you take back the plastic flutes and continue.
And I think that just highlights the importance of that process side when you're evaluating things, as well as just looking at the product, how the context in which it's used, like not just what it's doing, like the use of it. Doing it in one setting like this and in another setting will have different results. The context is really important.
Do we have any questions from the audience?
Yes, okay. Maybe I can try to speak a lot. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you all for very interesting discussions. And what just I'd like to ask more, if you can elaborate it a bit more, Lucy, of the early childhood education. You mentioned that that's quite an unexplored area or territory, and I'm really interested in that. And as I'm representing the City of Helsingin Education Division, and we cover the services from the early childhood education up to the adult training. And to me, early childhood education is even more important when we are thinking of, for example, the polarization of our society. So actually it starts very early. And well, I don't have the answer, but I'm really interested to know more about your thoughts and what should we be doing for the early childhood education services and digitalization, and how to kind of promote the cohesion of our societies and try to assess. Well, unfortunately, my talk was in Finnish, but I said in the very beginning that we educators have the future of our societies in our hands. And it's not only the basic education, but it starts from the early childhood education. And in this project, we also have I think at least, was it Tampere, they have included early childhood education. Helsinki hasn't, but I'm still very interested in that area and how to develop it as a lifelong learning span.
So, yes, agree. That's one of the reasons we're so interested in early childhood is that is where you see the roots of inequality. That's really where it starts. I suppose one of the reasons I'd say I'd like to see more going on there is we don't have the solution. I'm not clear what the solutions are. Particularly, you have this challenge that people are not sure what's the best way for very young children to engage with technologies. The one idea that I've seen that I think works really nicely is it's a company called Easy Peasy. And they've taken, anyone who has children knows how easy it is for any pushy middle-class parent to find out exactly what you should be doing with your 3-year-old so that they're ready for school, and what games and what food they should be eating and so on. What Easy Peasy do is they work through schools and through children's centres to reach all sorts of parents, and they sign them up onto this app that pushes really simple ideas for games to play with children and it focuses on executive function and socio-emotional skills, so that not at all in kind of cognitive areas, but here are games you can do to help children think about shapes and patterns and how you interact with other people. And they've done some early evaluations that show that that really is being used by all parents. And they have this nice model where they group parents into a pod, and they make sure that all the parents in a pod are from a real spectrum of society. So it's not something that has particular stigma around it. But yeah, as I say, I think even if you are a pushy middle-class parent, we all know that sometimes you're just really exhausted and tired, and you don't know what to do with, the next 3 hours with this 3-year-old child. So this idea that you just push simple games to do, I think it solves a problem both for the parent and helps develop the child.
I think the atmosphere in Finland is very much so that we shouldn't put little children not sitting in by a desk or too early or to stare at some kind of mobile device. So I think what we need for early childhood education is very much a bit like what's Pokemon Go kind of thing, so that it integrates physical activity. And we have one research now going on. We've been following up someniska, which is neck pain. And our first indicators with American public health researchers is that very intensive computer use starting at the age of 12, we've been following up, is predicting neck pain already at the age of 16. So with the early childhood education, we need to be very careful with ergonomics and that children move and they do things. And there are lots of technologies, like you can dance and calculate and you can do all kinds of things and you create. And what we are saying that screen time is an old-fashioned concept, because there is no screen time if you are integrating technology with the environment. But that's one of the reasons that from Finland there are very few things coming, that kind of apps that would come from early childhood education, because in Finland before age of 7 it's mainly free play and spending like 3 hours per day in outdoors in kindergartens. We are constantly outdoors. Whatever weather we would have. So for some others it looks a bit funny, but that's the philosophy.
Yeah, I'd like to continue on that. What are the sort of big themes that we can support? We can support with the use of technology. I think physical movement is one, and creative thinking is another one. Yeah. For example, making movies, making songs, writing stories, listening stories, and that kind of creative activities. They become much easier with the use of technology. Yeah. Also for the early education children. So I think that is one core area that we could be focusing on.
I've got one I'm sitting here trying to think of the name of the program and I can't. It's something based in the US and it's come over to the UK and we're trialing it. It has so one of the key important things is language acquisition for young children before you start school. And if you come from a more deprived background, the number of words that you know before you go to school is significantly different. So one of the key things is how can you improve conversation between parents and children. And it's a device that a parent wears, and it records how you're talking to your child, and then you can look through the transcript of that and basically try and improve how your questioning is with your kids and all the rest of it, but just language acquisition. We're running it because we want to see if volunteers can go into a parent's home and help them with it. But I think that's an interesting way of it's not the technology for the child, it's the technology to help with that relationship with the parent.
And then there are some, like the Turku people in our Growing Mind project, they have been doing research on sense of numbers that start developing at the age of 3, kind of seeing numbers everywhere, counting and these kinds of things, and it predicts learning mathematics later. And the other thing I like is, like my French class, is this Moomin language school idea, which is like 10 minutes per day, and then there are Moomin characters and you learn language in a playful way. So playful learning is something that we want to do very much. And that's also something with imagination and creativity, and children producing language as well.
Yeah, and one more thing that could be added also maybe to fix challenges of that could be solved is that we are now working, for example, in Namibia, and we have a lot of these developing countries around that could benefit from the good education. And for example, in Namibia, there is now starting a project where a couple of Finnish companies are providing teaching facilities, both in curriculum terms, but also technological and these physical environments combined in order to test how you can improve the teaching outcomes in poor area and in good area, which is kind of inequality is a main thing in these countries, in many countries. So if you can provide these kind of solutions by using EdTech, I think that's quite a big thing to do.
Let's continue on that and talk a little bit more about exporting education innovations. We have a lot of companies in the audience. What should companies keep in mind when transferring innovations from one national innovation ecosystem to another? For example, what comes to cultural factors or institutional factors, what you should keep in mind?
Well, if I start, I think the one thing is that different countries, of course, may have a different curriculum in teaching. So you have to know where you are going and what kind of tools you can use and what is the process in teaching and what are the learning. So you have to know the process. I think that's the first thing to do.
But I was laughing because we were talking about colonialism, because we think that in developing countries you can kind of sell something old-fashioned. And I was saying that I've been working in South Africa in very challenging townships, and I've seen the most innovative preschool there. They were using iPads and doing things, and it was in a container, you know. So putting people sit in a rows and start preaching them like missionaries, I think that's colonialism. And the idea that we can just sell all kinds of old-fashioned stuff there and they must be so retarded because they come from, you know, this kind of thinking is very bad. So I think that all countries need innovative pedagogy, but you have to customize it, not to start from here if people are like bonfire kind of concept would be much better than missionary concept, for instance.
Oh, sorry.
Lucy.
I mean, I was to build on that. Everything is different. The teachers will have different levels of training. They will be supervised in a different way. Children will have gone through different things in order to get to school. They will be in school for a different length of time. They will have different levels of access to technology inside the classroom, outside the classroom. Will they have their own devices? Will the devices that your app works on be chargeable in a classroom? Will they just be locked away in a cupboard? You just have to go back to scratch, first principles, and test and retest. To take an example which is not technological, but from South Africa again, I think this is about 20 years ago. They have a really challenging education system. They put an awful lot of money into education and they've seen no results from that. They've seen no improvement. And one of the things they tried to do is they came and looked at the Finnish education system. And they said, how can we be more like the Finns? This is incredible. And they looked at how decentralized the Finnish system is and how much autonomy is given to teachers. And they trialed this in the Western Cape and said, this is what we're going to do. And it didn't work at all, because the teachers had a very different level of education, very different relationship with the state, a very different idea of what education was for and the philosophy behind education. So it's everything that you have to look at again, the whole system.
Yeah, just about to share this one funny story that came to my mind about knowing the market where you're going to take your product. A couple of years back, I was working in a company where we developed a music-making application. And then we were collaborating with FinPro. Nowadays it's Business Finland, but they were doing these education export trips to different countries. And there was a trip coming to Saudi Arabia, and they asked us that, do we want to join? We thought that, well, not sure, it sounds exciting, maybe we come. And we almost already bought the flight tickets. But just before we did that, I was Googling that music education, Saudi Arabia, and found out that it was illegal there to teach music. So I thought that would have been a pretty bad thing to try to do that there, end up in a jail.
Or physical education for girls, or driving school, or something like that. But we also have misconceptions. I've been looking at statistics in Africa. For instance, in Namibia, penetration of mobile phones, I mean smartphones, is more than 100%. So basically, you can very much build on that. The teacher has one computer and the kids have some kind of smartphone. But then all these networks, and you need collaboration now with Nokia again, because you need Wi-Fi's and you need all kinds of things, and there are all kinds of restrictions.
I'm going to continue on when Kirsti, you said that you're collaborating with Nokia.
I wish, because in order to do business in Namibia, you would need them to build their network so that you can have Wi-Fi and then you can do something.
Actually, even better, because my question is that when you are, when we are talking about collaboration between the academia and then the companies, what is kind of like your dream or your wish that what have we not yet seen? What is still, like, instead of maybe small projects, what is coming to come after that?
I think you need to put the other one in, and that's the schools. I think you need to put the teachers and the students in, because I think if it's just the universities and the companies, yeah, you're missing the third point.
Yeah. I mean, we have been, for example, working there in Namibia with a few companies, and it has been quite fruitful. But I think there is a lot to learn at the university side, how to combine these. I mean, in the long term, these company relationships. I think all the things that we have been talking today, I mean, this is digitalization and so on. It's different kind of, if we talk about co-creation and so I think in quite many fields we should try to figure out how to do things differently, that we are not so separated that, okay, there we have a public sector and it's doing something, and then we have a private sector and they're doing something. Actually, these are quite thin lines between these different kind of imaginary groups. So I think there is a lot of new ways of doing things. And this is a very good example when you are doing this, or case when you are doing these digital solutions. As you said, it's partly technological things, but even more so, it's kind of a change in our behavior and how we practice these things. So in that sense, I think we should focus those at least as much as technology.
And I really like the idea of like having the pedagogy test. Like, I know you've got your product idea, you can go to an academic and they'll test it out. And I know, thinking about how we're evaluating those products. And I mean, one of our challenges in the UK at the moment is there a stamp that we could give products, and how would you assess all that? So I was really interested to hear the other things that are happening. And I just think that kind of combination of people coming together, testing things out, just works really well. But it's that three-way thing: academia, schools, and the companies themselves.
If you think about co-creation, and we're all believers here, is there some kind of I'm not sure whether I want to end this for critical notions, but I will still do it. But please do that in a constructive manner. But kind of like, what's your if we are taking co-creation and co-design as something that is not a silver bullet, that does not fit for all solutions or all situations, what is your critical insight on co-creation? When does it not work, or what should be added, or what should be taken into consideration when doing co-creation?
I think the biggest problem in Finland is that we are a very small country. We are not a country, we are a country club. So we should not say whether this is from Espoo or Helsinki, whether this is coming from this or that company. World is so big, there is room for all companies, and too much kind of projecting, this is my idea, I'm not revealing this, and sign this, that you are not saying anything, and how do you co-create if you keep everything a secret? So there must be trust, and we are a society of trust. So I think we should trust each other more and collaborate more, and also collaborate with other Nordic countries. Because if you go to China, it's just Scandinavian, Finnish, Swedish, Norwegian, who cares? So that, for instance, if we were collaboration with Swedish, who can market, then Finnish engineers who are great, and then we could have the hardworking Koreans and Taiwanese kinds of Chinese people. That would be a great combination. So I think in order to co-creation, you need to collaborate and you need to trust other people and not see everybody as a rival. Many startups do that. They are just like, and they are not opening up. Teemu Arina said that nowadays to share is to do business. The more you share free, the more you get, in a way.
Yeah, I agree very much about that, but a practical way to create this kind of trust is usually to define these co-creation processes, what is the value that you are really creating in that process, as I was saying earlier. And it's not always so obvious. You should really understand what is the value that you are creating with others and who is doing what, and then how you share it. Because I think this is also the motivational factor for most to join these processes, if they know what they will get out of that. I mean, it's not that easy.
Hitchhikers, maybe.
Yeah.
Who just want to get the profits but don't want to do any work. It's very typical. Collaboration with university, we give free all the ideas and then companies make cash. That's not a good thing either.
I think one of the big dangers of co-creation is, by definition, you're working with the champions, the forward leaders, the people who are really excited about what you do. And I think that's great at the beginning because you need that access and you need that enthusiasm. But the challenge is to break out of that little circle of love and try it somewhere harder where the teacher doesn't even want a computer in their classroom at all. How will what you do work for everybody, not just the vanguard?